Good morning, everyone. Our group will presentation about the comparison between of developing country and developed country. This is our member Elvira, Helda, Rizkuna, Salsa, and Yuri Pratili. To be more clear, it will be nice if we know about the meaning and definition of developing country. So developing country are a term for countries that have not yet been able to achieve development goals. According to Kelso Furtado, developing country are countries that still do not apply high technology in the production process, and the use of labor in the country is also not optimal. And then definition of developed country. So developed country is a term for a country that has a relatively high standard of living and has an equitable economic level, very rapid economic growth, high income per capita, and use high technology in various sectors in the country. Then how about the indicators between developed country and developing country? My friend will continue to explain.
Uh, so we are going to talk about the indicator of developed and developing countries. So the categorization of countries does refer to an economic perspective, but basically a country is said to be developed or developing, also seen from the quality of the country's administration, such as how people can easily access education, health, communication, transportation, or other service. Meanwhile, from an economic point of view, several criteria and indicators that are used as global benchmark to categorize a developed and developing country include the first is gross domestic product or GDP. Regarding to that category of countries, economic growth is always linked to this issue. Economic growth refers to the achievement of a country because it says how far their market can produce goods and services in a certain period, which will affect to the total amount of production of goods and service in a country, which allows GDP to be a benchmark for whether the country is developed or developing. The basic criterion for making a country developed is that they must reach a minimum GDP of 2 trillion US dollar for in 1 year. Meanwhile, for developing countries, the minimum gross domestic product is projected to only reach 5,065 US dollar in 1 year. And the second is high income per capita. Although an income is not a measure of the country's prosperity, in practice, per capita state income is a guarantor that poverty in the country is low. In line with that, high per capita income allows people to have relatively large income, and therefore, sometimes with this conclusion makes a country which has a high income per capita will be categorized as developed countries and successful in providing welfare to its people. On the other hand, countries with the law of per capita income will be categorized as developing countries. And the third point is industrialization level. Developed countries are considered as countries that have a rapid industrial growth rate because their industrial activities are supported by technological advance and the era so that they strive to influence the development of their human resources to provide progress to their industrial sector. While developing countries are at a lower level, they still have late industrial growth rate due to the lack of the modernity in the technology and quality of human resources. And the fourth is livelihood. Because it is supported by a very rapid industrial growth rate, it is possible for people in developed countries to tend work in the industrial and service sectors, while the low industrial growth in developing countries allow their people to work in the agricultural sector. They will generally only be able to depend on primary production from the agricultural sector produce. And the fifth point, low poverty rate. The high level the high level of poverty will always refer to the low opportunity to work in the country, which makes a country has a relatively large unemployment rate, as is often the case in developing countries. Meanwhile, supported by infrastructure and high growth rates, developed countries tend to have a low poverty rates. They can definitely guarantee to provide a decent income with appropriate pay to their people so that job opportunities are wide and allow their unemployment curve below. And the sixth point is existence of infrastructure. The high level of infrastructure development provided in a country also makes a country's big benchmark to be said to be advanced. In line with that, infrastructure plays an important role in releasing the effectiveness and efficiency of an activity carried out. Infrastructure will allow productivity to increase and ensure the stability of the activities population of a country. Therefore, countries that have equitable and high infrastructure development will be categorized as developed countries, while on the contrary, developing countries will have low levels of infrastructure development. And the seventh point is export commodities. In general, developed countries have large disparities in the aspects of export and import activities. Developed countries will tend to suppress the number of export rather than imports to meet the needs of their people. Meanwhile, developing countries have put a pressure on imports due to limited expertise and technology to manage their resources. In line with this, developed countries will focus more on exporting industrial goods, while developing countries will focus on commodifying industrial raw materials, agricultural products, livestock, fisheries, and mining. The country representative, basically the spread of the developed countries and developing countries in various parts of the world is evenly distributed. Through the consideration of several factors above, many countries on several continents are categorized as developed countries. For instance, continent of Europe, United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Belgium, Asia continent, for instance, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. And from Americas is United States, Canada, and Brazil. And a representative from Oceania is New Zealand and Australia. While examples from developing countries on the continents include continent of Europe, such as Romania, Moldova, and Turkey. For example, from Asia continent, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, and India. From the Americas, such as Mexico, Argentina, and Chile, and from Oceania continent like Tonga, Fiji, and Kiribati. Next, please. So the next will be described by our friends.
Okay, let's move to the example of the developing country. I know there is a lot of kind of developing country in this world, but we choose one of them, which is China, or People's Republic of China. Next slide, please. So the general background of China has a full name, namely People's Republic of China. It's a country located in East Asia with Beijing as a capital. This country has the largest population in the world, and land area is 9.59 million square kilometers, making it the third largest country in the world. Next slide, please. The socioeconomic information about China. China has the economic field that applied a market economic system. China's products are currently floating in world market. The basis of the system of government in China, the Chinese government with communist ideology has succeeded in adopting the spirit of Western economic liberalization appropriately while maintaining its political and cultural ideology. The extraordinary growth of industrial and manufacturing enterprises by absorbing domestic and foreign capital not only boosts China's national economic growth, but also absorb extraordinary manpower. Next, please. And this is the political and administration background of China. China is an archipelagic country in the form of a republic whose government is led by president. China has power over 4 branches, or yuan, namely the executive yuan, representative yuan, judicial yuan, and supervisory yuan. The president appoints members of the executive yuan as members of his cabinet, including the prime minister, who is responsible for policy and order control. Next slide, please. And this is still also the administrative background of China, which in China, the political system follows the style of communist political system, which is totalitarian and slightly dictatorial. The party system applied is one party system, namely Communist Party. The highest body in China is the National People's Congress. The National People's Congress is a representative body consisting of representatives elected by the Provincial Congress, the Armed Forces, and Overseas China. In cultivating public participation in politics, the communist authorities tried to create people's lives in accordance with the norms of political socialization that they created. Next slide, please. And this is how China managed their crisis. And we call it crisis management. In China, we know that the COVID-19 crisis is occur on China, and this is how they manage their crisis. First step is replanning the response to the crisis. In China, the company's supply chain was able to recover more than 50% in just a few weeks after the COVID-19 outbreak. Then they used bottom-up and top-down approach, which in China, few companies are effectively balancing the two approaches, establishing a top-down framework with employees capable of innovation. And the third, they proactively create clarity and security for employees. The company carried out health checks for employees and their families from the early stages of the outbreak and prepare preventive equipment. And the fourth steps is flexible labor allocation. Chinese companies are relocating employees to new and valuable activities such as recovery planning or even lending them to the other companies. I think there is a lot of crisis management that Chinas have, but we're just put it into 4 steps. And then the ideology of the People's Republic of China, China's political system, which is more inclined to apply communist ideology, has given its own color to the bamboo curtain country. The Chinese Revolution had been going on for decades before the Communist Party became a major force in Chinese politics and took control of its government. Anti-imperialist is the most powerful element in the formation of communist ideology. So the next point will be presented by our friends.
So in this slide, we will be covering about one of the developed countries in the world. And for this particular case, we choose South Korea. Next slide, please. So for the general information of South Korea is formerly known as the Republic of Korea, and it is a region in East Asia which is situated in the southern part of the Korean Peninsula. And geographically speaking, South Korea shares land border with North Korea in the north and is located between the Yellow Sea to the west, the Korean Strait to the south, and Sea of Japan to the east. Next. As for the socio-economic condition of South Korea has a well-developed mixed economy. In fact, South Korea's economy is one of the most powerful in East Asia. And manufacturing, service industries such as banking account for the majority of its wealth. However, South Korea's road to become a developed country was met with many difficulties, especially after its independence from Japan in 1945. South Korea's economic growth became a matter of national survival. And to solve the current problem at the time, South Korea then started an export-oriented economy strategy in order to revitalize its economy. Next slide. So since South Korea's economic development is considered impressive because even though it lacks natural resources, they are relying heavily on human resources, which is supported by great attention to the field of education. And South Korea's demanding educational system, as well as the highly competent and informed population, are key drivers of the country's high-tech development and speedy economic growth. Next slide, please. Okay, for the politic and administration background, administratively speaking, South Korea is made up of special cities, metropolitan cities, and provinces. And the special city mentioned happens to be the capital of South Korea itself, which is Seoul. And as for the form of government, South Korea is a country in the form of a republic, and its constitution promotes a liberal democratic political system. The ideals contained in the constitution are based on the sovereignty of the people, with the state's whole authority derived from its citizens. As with other democratic countries, South Korea also divides its government into 3 branches. Next slide. For more information about separation of power will be explained in this slide. So as with other countries, South Korea divides itself into 3 branches. First, since the system of South Korea is presidential, the executive branch is held by the president, which is directly chosen by the people through election and is assisted by a prime minister. Secondly, the country's legislative branch is the National Assembly, and the legislature is unicameral with a single massive assembly of 273 members. Lastly, the judiciary is led by the Constitutional Court, which is the highest institution to hold judicial power, and this institution consisted of 9 judges. Next. Okay, next is about the crisis management. In order to crisis management, South Korea first made its attempt by establishing the National Emergency Management Agency, or known as NEMA, in 2004 as a single comprehensive agency in the field of emergency management. And then in 2014, NEMA was absorbed into the Ministry of Public Safety and Security. Since the ministry was reformed, NEMA was again merged into the Ministry of the Interior and Safety in July 2017. And now, Ministry of the Interior and Safety simultaneously act as the executive of the National Disaster and Safety Control Center as the core of crisis framework in South Korea. It has broad control over every crisis responses as well as the operation of the municipal, county, and district headquarters. The next slide will be explained by my friend Kauda.
Okay, thank you, Elvira. Now I will talk about the brief comparison between South Korea and China. So the first comparison is about the form of the country. So both of them have republic form of country and led by president. And for the administration, South Korea is divided into gan or country, gu or district, up or town, myeon or township, dong or association of neighborhood, ga or hamlet, and ri or village. And meanwhile, for China, is divided into provincial, district, and sub-district levels. And for the economy, South Korea is one of the free economies in the world. And while for China, it implements Western economic liberalization. For the ideology, South Korea is implementing liberalism and Confucianism, while China is implementing communism and Sanqiao. Next. Finally, about the conclusion. So the conclusion is countries in the world can be classified into 2 types, namely developed countries and developing countries. There are many indicators that determine whether a country can be categorized as a developed country or a developing country, such as per capita income and the standard of living of its people. It takes strong cooperation, of course, and coordination between developed countries and developing countries in order to create harmonious and synergetic collaboration. Developing countries must also learn from developed countries about how they manage their countries so that they become developed countries in the future. Okay, that's all from our presentation. I hope you can get any information from this presentation. Thank you so much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.